Before we saddle up for this wild story, drop a comment and let me know where you're tuning in from. Maybe it's a dusty ranch road out in Texas, a high-rise in downtown Chicago, or a quiet porch overlooking the pines in Oregon. I love seeing just how far these tales of chaos and karma can wander. The wind dragged the smell of iron and dry grass across the open plains. Dust moved like ghosts around the low cabin, each gust pressing heat and silence into the boards. A horse stood tethered nearby, rein slack, its dark eyes watching a man kneeling in the brittle yellow. His coat fell heavy across his bent frame, one hand braced on the earth, the other steadying the still weight of a woman whose blood marked the grass. Her eyes fluttered open just enough to find him, and her cracked lips gave out a whisper that cut through the quiet like a knife drawn slow. "You saved me, now end it." Eli Mercer didn't move. The words hung there raw, torn from a throat that had already screamed too much. He had found her an hour before, crawling through a dry wash like something thrown away, her trail of red staining the rocks. He had lifted her without a word, without a plan, only a heavy, aching certainty that leaving her there would make him no better than the men who had left her. She was Apache. The patterned cloth still wrapped her shoulders, streaked with dust and blood. Her jewelry, dulled by grime, caught a pale flash of sun. Any fool could see the risk. He felt it in his bones, in the weight of every story the town carried about Indians and vengeance, about men who crossed a line that couldn't be crossed twice. But Eli had run from the noise of men long ago. He carried no loyalty to the badge, nor to the drunks at the saloon who spat when they said his name. He had been a ranch hand, a hired gun, a shadow on the edge of too many fires. And now he was just a man on his knees, staring at a woman begging for death. "Not today," he said, voice low, like the ground might overhear. Her eyes closed as if the refusal hurt worse than her wounds. He shifted her against his chest, stood slow, and carried her toward the cabin. Each step stirred grit that rasped beneath his boots. The horse snorted once, uneasy. Inside, the air smelled of wood oil and smoke. The single room held only what a man needed to get by: a table, a bed frame, a stove barely holding a coal's glow. He laid her on the bed, her breath thin and ragged, then fetched water from the barrel out back. He tore strips from an old shirt, cleaned her shoulder where the bullet had torn through, pressed cloth to a gash across her ribs. She never cried out, only watched him through half-lidded eyes, as if measuring every movement for betrayal. Night fell slow. Crickets filled the gaps where words should have gone. When she finally spoke again, it was with the weight of a woman who had lost too much to care, who heard. "Why?" He didn't look up from a bandage he was tying. "Didn't figure you should die out there." A bitter laugh scraped from her throat. "Better than here." He tied the knot tight, sat back on the stool, hands loose between his knees. "Might be, but you're here now." Her stare held a fire, even through pain. Suspicion sat behind it like a loaded rifle. He didn't expect thanks, and she didn't offer any. The room settled into a cold truce, a man and a woman bound not by trust, but by the thin thread of survival. By morning, the world had already started to notice. A rider passed the cabin at dawn, eyes cutting toward the window like a knife, then spurred away. Eli watched from the porch, jaw tight, knowing how quick words spread on the wind. By noon, the store in town turned him away with a polite shake of the head, and by nightfall, a rock crashed through his window, leaving a sharp-edged hole where the quiet had been. Naomi, he learned her name only when she cursed it under her breath in fever, sat against the wall while he swept the glass. Sweat clung to her skin, but her gaze stayed sharp. "They know," she said. He dumped the shards into a tin pail, set it aside. "Reckon they do. You'll be marked now." He leaned the broom against the wall, looked at her like a man measuring weight before a hard lift. "Ain't the first time." She studied him a long while, as if trying to see what kind of man carried a dying enemy into his own bed, patched her up, and sat silent through the storm. But the question stayed unspoken, trapped somewhere between shame and curiosity. That night, the cabin felt smaller, the air heavier. He sat by the window, pistol in his lap, listening for the sound of horses or boots. She lay beneath his mother's blanket, his only heirloom, its faded blue squares rising with her every breath. Near midnight, a coyote cried out, long and mournful, carried across the plains like an omen. Naomi stirred, eyes opening in the dim glow. She pushed herself up, wincing, and stood in the doorway, leaning on the frame. her silhouette cut against the silver wash of moonlight, proud even in weakness. "They'll come for you," she said, her voice steadier now. "For me. They won't leave a witness." Eli glanced at her, then back at the dark beyond the window. "I'm done letting other folks tell me who deserves savant." For a moment, the wind dropped, and the world felt hollow, like the air before a storm. Naomi's shoulders sag a fraction, the smallest surrender, neither trust nor surrender, just a soft crack in a wall built too high for too long. She stepped back inside, choosing the floor by the fire over the porch where the night might swallow her. Eli stayed where he was, eyes on the horizon that wasn't yet burning, fingers brushing the worn handle of his gun, waiting for footsteps he already knew were coming. The night held its breath, and so did they. Dawn came brittle and sharp, the kind of morning that carried heat behind its chill. The plains stretched wide, a sea of pale grass bending in the wind, and on that quiet horizon came the sound of hooves. Eli sat at the table, fingers tracing the rim of his coffee tin, eyes fixed on nothing but the slow crawl of light across the floorboards. Naomi sat against the far wall, her blanket drawn close, her jaw set though her breath still hitched with pain. Neither spoke. The silence between them was not emptiness, but a waiting, a tightening of rope before the snap. The riders appeared like stains against the pale sky, 3 men on lean horses, their hats pulled low, their jackets flaring with each turn. They didn't ride fast. They didn't need to. They moved like men already sure of the ending. Eli stood, pulled his coat over his shoulders, checked the revolver at his hip. He caught Naomi's eyes just long enough to see the flare of fear hidden under iron, then stepped outside, closing the door behind him. The men spread as they drew near, horses snorting, hooves thudding dull against the packed dirt. The one in front, a man with a crooked grin and a red scarf, leaned forward in the saddle. "Mornin', Mercer," he said, voice lazy but loud enough to cut the wind. "Heard you been keeping company that ain't exactly welcome in this county." Eli said nothing, just stared, calm as a stone in a river. The rider spat into the dirt. "Don't play dumb. You got a squaw in there. That's blood trouble. Town don't take kindly to that sort of stain." Another rider chuckled low. "Hand her over. Maybe we forget you got her." Eli's hand rested near the butt of his gun, but he didn't draw. His voice, when it came, was steady, a quiet blade sliding free. "Ain't handing anyone over." The lead rider's grin thinned. "Boy, you got no stake here. She ain't yours. Folks won't cry if we bury you next to her. Hell, they'll likely raise a drink." Eli's jaw flexed. "If you're looking to hang somebody, you best bring more rope." The laugh that followed was too quick, too nervous. The horses shifted, catching the smell of something gone wrong. A shot cracked, dirt leaping at Eli's boots. "Last chance, Mercer," the scarf man growled. "Step aside." Eli didn't move. The air thickened, heavy with dust and breath, and the faint groan of leather. For a heartbeat, nothing dared shift. Then the world snapped. The rider to the left jerked his reins, horse lunging, gun flashing from his coat. Eli moved, quick and clean, the first shot tearing through the man's shoulder, the recoil barely rocking his stance. A second rider swung his rifle, clubbing it downward toward Eli's head. They collided in a storm of fists and wooden grit, boots slipping in the churned dirt. Inside, Naomi struggled upright, pain slicing through her ribs like knives. Through the window, she saw the chaos, a blur of men and dust, the sun striking sparks off metal. Her eyes landed on the rifle by the hearth. She crawled for it, every inch a scream through her muscles, hands slick with sweat as she pulled the long gun free. The cabin door banged against the wall as she shouldered through, legs unsteady, vision tunneling from blood loss and fury. One rider had Eli pinned, fist hammering his jaw, while the third circled behind, gun raised to strike. Naomi lifted the rifle, breath ragged, steadied it against the doorframe. She fired. The shot cracked the morning wide open. The man behind Eli jerked, howled, and tumbled from his saddle, clutching a bleeding arm. The one on top of Eli faltered, eyes wide at the sudden thunder, just long enough for Eli to drive an elbow up and a fist across. The man reeled, and Eli wrenched the revolver from his own belt, pressing the barrel under his jaw before the fool could think twice. The horses scattered, the wounded rider scrambled, dragging his friend with curses and gasps. The scarfed man spat blood and dust, eyes burning hate, but Eli's steady hand kept the threat quiet, the silent weight of a trigger, half pulled, doing what words could not. "Leave," Eli said, voice quiet as the dying wind. They left. Not fast, not slow, just broken. The plains swallowed their sound until only the whistle of grass remained. Eli stood there a moment longer, pistol hanging loose at his side, breath coming hard. Naomi leaned against the doorframe, the rifle slipping from her fingers, her whole body trembling under the weight of what she'd done. He turned toward her, face battered, lips split, eyes raw and searching. "You asked me to end it," he said softly. "Guess I couldn't." Naomi's breath hitched, her jaw trembling, though her voice, when it came, carried a strange steadiness. "Maybe you did. Maybe you ended the part of me that waited to die." Eli stepped closer, careful, slow, as if any sudden move might break the fragile shape of what had formed between them. He offered a hand, not for thanks, not for comfort, just for balance. She stared at it, then at him, then let her fingers settle into his palm, both of them standing in the blood-marked dirt, held upright by something nameless and new. They sat together in the grass as the sun climbed, two silhouettes against a horizon too wide to measure, their silence not heavy now, but whole. Somewhere behind them, the cabin waited, scarred glass, burned barn, a mark on the land that would not be forgiven. The town would talk. Men would ride again. The world would not grant mercy. But for now, the wind carried nothing but the steady beat of their breaths, like two hearts that had decided, against reason, to keep going. By nightfall, the horse was saddled, the few supplies packed. Naomi climbed up first, ribs stiff, eyes sharp with a survivor's will. Eli mounted behind, not touching her, not needing to. They rode west, where the plains met the sky, where no one yet knew their names. An old voice, much later, would tell of them, of a woman who chose life when the world told her none was left, and of a man who found his own redemption in the simple act of not walking away. Sometimes salvation, the voice would say, ain't a miracle, ain't a fire from heaven. Sometimes it's just a stubborn soul refusing to let another go, even when the world howls for blood. And that kind of grace changes everything.